Hello, everyone, and welcome to our presentation about cybersecurity for broadcasters. If you're interested in hearing a little bit about cybersecurity, come on over and we'll give you 15, 20 minutes about the cybersecurity market and how cybersecurity is impacting what's happening in the broadcast industry. I'm Dave Meltzer. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at TripWire. TripWire is part of the Belden organization along with Grass Valley. And so, although TripWire is one of the biggest cybersecurity companies in the world, what we've actually been able to do over the last couple of years is cross between the areas of IT security and broadcast operations security and started to find out what are these coming challenges we're going to have in the broadcast industry as some of the IT security challenges that the IT organizations have faced for the last 20 years start to come into the broadcast operations part of broadcasting companies' businesses. So what I'm going to talk about today is what happens when organizations adopt IP. We've seen this transformation happen multiple times before. We've seen industries that were using proprietary protocols transition to use standard IP-based protocols because of the efficiency gains, the interoperability gains, and the productivity that comes from using open standards for communication. We've seen this transformation happen more recently in the industrial control system security space as well. They've been moving from a place where they were using proprietary protocols, they were using things that each individual vendor built up for themselves, things that were not used outside of their industry at all, and moved to standard IP-based protocols. They were using systems that had to live for decades sometimes. They were using systems that were high availability systems. So the industrial control space was an area where manufacturing lines were relying on these production systems, where oil and gas pipelines were using these systems to operate. And these were systems that absolutely positively could not go down. And what I've seen here is a lot of corollaries between what was happening in the industrial control system security space and what's happening now in the broadcast operations space. And when we think about security and what is this transformation going to mean for the broadcast industry, we can share some of what we've seen happen here multiple times before. So you're all aware, you've all seen in the news that in the IT world, security breaches continue to happen. Security breaches are soaring, in fact, and we're seeing more breaches than ever. So they've been doing security in IT for 20 years now, and they still haven't quite gotten it right. We're still seeing all of these break-ins happening. And let me give you an example of what's not working here. How many of you sitting down have to take some sort of security training at your company? Security awareness. So one of the things they tell you in security awareness is don't click on the attachment if you don't know who the person is that sent it to you, right? Security 101, because one of the most common ways industries get broken into is what they call a phishing attack. Someone sends a phishing email. Well, let me tell you why that doesn't work. This is my email address, dmeltzer@tripwire.com. If you got an email from me and I sent you a presentation or a document and you saw it was from me, you'd probably trust me, right? I'm the CTO of a security company, probably not trying to break into your network. Well, what you see here is this is a mail header. This is what you actually need to read to figure out, did the email actually come from me? So how many of you in the audience could figure out whether that email actually came from me? One, maybe? You have to blow it up a little bit? I blew it up a little bit. Well, if you look at the right information, you probably could figure out whether it came from a tripwire.com email address. But are you going to do this for every single email you get every single day? No. This is what people tell you to do for IT security. Don't open the wrong emails. This is not working. This is why in IT, people keep getting broken into. Breaches continue to happen, and this is the most common way that all these breaches you see in the news actually start out. People open the wrong attachments. What we've actually seen in the IT world, today there are over 70,000 vulnerabilities that exist for your Windows systems, your Unix systems, all the different applications that are in use there. And this has been going on, and we've seen an explosion of it, and there's no sign that it's actually slowing down. Well, let me show you what it looks like for the industrial control system space. Industrial control systems, up until about 5 years ago, there were less than 100 vulnerabilities across every system that had ever been created for decades. And then something interesting occurred. They started moving to IP. they started connecting these systems to the corporate network. They started having security researchers who said, I could actually do something interesting if I could hop from the corporate network to the industrial network and break into those systems. And what we have seen over the last couple of years is an explosion in the number of vulnerabilities that exist in those systems. And here's the really interesting thing about it. These are not new vulnerabilities. Most of the issues that exist in these industrial control environments have actually been there for decades. It's just they weren't connected to an IP network before. Nobody could get at these systems before. Nobody could get at the code that had the bug in it to go exploit that issue before. And so what happens here is, it's not that all of a sudden in 2010, people started writing very insecure software. What happened was, for 30 years they wrote insecure software, and then they decided, I have a good idea. I'm going to connect all of this insecure systems I built for the last 30 years. I'm going to put an IP protocol stack on top of it, and I'm going to connect it into the network. And here's what happens when you do that. An explosion in the number of vulnerabilities and the number of attacks you see against those systems. Here's the other thing that you see happen when you make this conversion into standard IP. You move from a model, and this is what happened in the IT and the ICS world over the last 20 years, where the only people who could ever possibly hack these systems were insiders, were people who were in the industry, were people who wrote the software, were people who actually knew what all these manufacturers of all these devices and how these systems worked. Because outside attackers, they didn't know the protocols, they didn't know what the devices were, they didn't know what the devices even did. It took a lot of knowledge. What's happened over the years is it now takes almost no expertise at all to break into an IT system or an industrial control system. All you have to do is go out to the internet, download a toolkit that has the exploits publicly available, you click a button, point it at the thing, and it breaks into it for you. And so these systems require no expertise and no knowledge to break into. Meanwhile, here's the other bad news, the sophistication of attackers who are trying to do malicious things like nation states and hacktivists and terrorist groups who are now targeting these systems to create disruption, is getting increasing over time as well. So it's easier to break into, but there's more sophisticated people out there who want to do bad things to these devices. So this is a bad equation overall. What I've seen in the broadcast industry over the last couple of years is a lot of corollary to what's happened in the industrial control world over the last 10, 15 years. There's been an explosion in the adoption of standard IP-based communication and IP protocols for broadcast operations, for broadcast playout. And with that is going to come a lot of risk from new vulnerabilities as these systems get connected together. So everyone in the broadcast industry should be aware that we're creating a new level of risk by connecting things together. And the things that worked to keep broadcast systems secure 10 years ago are not going to be the same thing that work for the next 10 years. We're going to have to do things differently. So let me just explain what are some of the things that we can do. First, security is really complicated. There's over 1,600 security vendors that are out there. There's over 60 different kinds of security controls that exist. So if you want to go secure an entire environment, it's not one product, it's not one tool, it's a comprehensive program of security that you need that's going to be a combination of people, process, and technology. And you need to be building out this security program and focusing it on the broadcast operations side. When you look at, well, how do I secure my broadcast operations network or these systems? The first thing that people need to start with is the fundamentals, what we call foundational security. The basics of security that work to protect you from 95% of attacks are the same things that worked in IT and the same things that worked in ICS. So you want to start with things like knowing what assets do I have? Are they being patched and kept up to date with the latest vendor firmware and patches? Are they being checked for vulnerabilities? Do I know if someone maliciously changed the systems that existed out there? Those are the basics of security that exist within these environments. There's a whole host of different frameworks that exist out there in the world for looking at how do you build out a security program. And people need to be looking at these. There's something called the CIS critical security controls. It's a list of 20 things that you need to be thinking about relative to security if you're going to secure any kind of environment. And these critical security controls are very applicable to the broadcast industry as well. So we're going to have some emerging standards in the coming years for specific broadcast security frameworks and security standards, but there's a lot that's already out there. And all of these are very similar in what they talk about and how you think about security. The most important thing that you can do when you think about securing your broadcast operations is something in the cybersecurity industry we call move left. Or the other way we would say it would be move up the supply chain or move up the stack. And what this means is you have to be, if you're running a broadcast operation system or a broadcast playout system, you need to be relying on the manufacturers and the vendors of the IP connected devices you're putting into that system to have a security mindset, or you're going to have an insecure system. You can't cobble together 10 different manufacturers that are building 10 different IP connected systems, all in insecure ways, and build a secure system out of that. You need 10 vendors who are all thinking about building security into these systems from the ground up. And that means a few different things. It means, do they have a secured software development lifecycle? Are they building the code securely from the beginning as they build out this hardware and the software you're going to deploy? Are they thinking about, am I assessing these systems for vulnerabilities and risks before I ever ship it to end users? Are they thinking about, do I have a system for assessing risk and shipping patches and updates to my customers when the inevitable vulnerabilities are discovered? If your vendors are not taking security seriously, I can promise you one thing, and that is they're shipping you hardware that is inherently insecure. And so you really need to have the vendors you work with take security seriously. And what we've seen in the IT world and what we saw in the ICS world happen is the people who are buying products go to the vendors and say, I'm not going to buy insecure products anymore. Unless you can show me how you're building them securely, I'm not going to keep buying from you. And so pay attention to this. If you're a manufacturer, pay attention, because your customers are going to start asking these questions. And if you're a customer, you should be asking your vendors these questions. The second thing I'll say is security is not a binary decision. Security is never yes, it's secure, or no, it's insecure. It's always going to be a continuous process of trying to improve the baseline of security that we have. When you buy from a manufacturer, don't expect that they're going to give you a 100% secure piece of hardware. That's unrealistic. It doesn't happen in IT. It doesn't happen in ICS. There's good reasons for that. There's been actually research that says it would be 10 times more expensive to actually formally prove a piece of hardware is secure versus reach a certain level of assurance for that hardware that you receive. And so the way people do this is they build things with secure software development life cycles. They ship you hardware that is a level of security that's better than it used to be, and they look for continuous improvement. And that's the way you should be thinking about your own security programs too. How can I get a baseline, get the basics in place, and then find a way to continuously improve my security over time? That's how you'll think about security. That's how you'll keep ahead of what other people are doing. And that's ultimately how you'll keep ahead of the attackers as well. Hopefully I've given you a few things to think about when it comes to cybersecurity and broadcasting, and hopefully a few questions to ask your vendors, and if you're a vendor, a few questions to ask your software developers and your hardware engineers. Thanks so much for your time.